Yeah, are you guys excited to be here? Me too. My name is Christopher Buellman. I am the author of the medieval horror novel Between Two Fires, as well as The Black Tongue Thief and The Daughter's War. And I am going to let my co-panelists introduce themselves right now.
I'm Tessa Grattan. I am the author of 16 young adult and adult high fantasy novels, Shakespeare retellings, queer fairy tales, and also a couple of Star Wars books.
I'm Stephen Cruz. I am the author of Squires of Raincourt, and yeah, super excited to be here.
Well, we're going to be getting right into the thick of things. You guys are here because you're interested in world building and building religious systems and mythologies and folklores for books is really one of the funnest things that I get to do as a fantasy author. So I guess the first topic for discussion that I'd like to bring up is to go check in with my fellow authors and see who you've read that does it particularly well that you would like to recommend to this lovely audience.
N.K. Jemisin is probably my favorite world builder, currently creating worlds. Every single one of her books has detailed, fantastic, but also really accessible, complicated worlds. And she's done secondary world fantasy, she's done contemporary fantasy, she's done sort of like sci-fi, other planetary, but still magical fantasy. Like she's really done a broad swath of things, and she's just pristine every time.
In your opinion, what's a good entry point?
Oof. My favorite is her duology. The Shadowed Sun is the second book. And it's her only duology, the Dreamblood duology. That's what it is. That has really grounded but secondary world fantasy world building, if that's what you're really looking for, that one. If you really want more romance in the incredible world building, then her original trilogy that starts with the 10,000 Kingdoms. And if you want like politically engaged and really like relevant and hard, but still very incredible and beautiful, then the Broken Earth trilogy.
I read The City We Decay and I really enjoyed it.
I just read that one and also really liked that
Very,
one.
very urban fantasy.
Yeah, I'm more of a secondary world like reader myself, and so that's why that one is a little bit farther down, but also excellent.
Yeah. Yes. What about you?
My favorite's definitely Brandon Sanderson. I just think every book is a masterclass in world building, and particularly on the topic of mythology and belief systems, he just perfectly integrates them into every story, every world, the magic system. It's just excellent.
Nice. I would say a book that bears investigation for those interested in this sort of thing would be The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie. That is probably the most interesting take on gods and divinity that I've seen yet. The gods in this world, like, they could be anything. They could be a rock in a boulder in a field, or they could be a cloud of mosquitoes. But the gods have to be careful because they could die. And one of the ways they could die is if they make a statement that is proven to be untrue. If they make an error with their word, so their speech can be very rarefied as they try to avoid saying something that's going to cause them to be extinguished. But it's great stuff.
I also second that one. Very good.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's something that a lot of people forget to explore, is that in most belief systems, even the gods have some sort of rule system that they're following. You know, the Greeks couldn't break a vow that was made on the river Styx, all sorts of things like that. You know, it's divinities in most mythologies still have some sort of law system they have to follow.
Yeah, and I find that more interesting. I find it interesting when there is a great power, but it is constrained by something. To take a side tangent, you know, I enjoy vampire stories. but I tend to like it. The more flawed and killable they are, the more I tend to like it. When they get to be like demigods, sometimes it starts to lose me a bit.
Well, that's like what introduces conflict, and we need conflict for stories. And so if even the gods have weaknesses, or the religious system or whatever, that gives us really good avenues to investigate different kinds of conflict.
Yeah, absolutely true. So have we got between the three of us, I wonder if we have a favorite deity that's been presented, or a pantheon that's been presented in fantasy.
The first thing that comes to my mind is just how entertained I was the first time I read the Percy Jackson books, where they took a real world mythology and they said, how would that adapt to the modern world? So suddenly we've got Poseidon wearing Bermuda shorts and his throne is a fisherman's chair. Ares is always wearing a modern day military uniform, things like that. So even though that was not an original mythology, the end result was kind of its own thing. And that is something you can do when you're creating a book. If you're using a real world mythology, you don't have to feel confined by how it was presented. I remember once seeing a professor of classical studies say, if you went back to ancient Greece and you told them the story of Disney's Hercules, they'd say, yeah, somehow that is also true. They were adaptive. These myths came from various parts, various regions, and were accumulating. And so you really don't have to feel confined, even when using a real world mythology.
I'll say that, first of all, I want to say that I really enjoy the religion of the Seven in Game of Thrones. I think that those iconic figures of the stranger and the blacksmith and the warrior all make sense. But long ago, when I was a kid, I read a comic book, and this always stuck with me. It was some comic in the late 70s, and these guys were on this strange world, and they were about to be killed in horrific ways. But one of these astronauts was an alien, and his religion rewarded him for extraordinary death. So he was happy to go to this strange thing in this pit that was going to tear him apart. I thought that always stuck with me.
Yeah, I've always really appreciated the gods in Robin Lefever's Mortalist. Oh my gosh, I'm really bad at remembering titles. But it is Mortal Heart is one of the books. It's a trilogy, and it's about assassin nuns, like medieval assassin nuns, and so they serve a god of death. And Robin Lefever's took some older French ideas of pre-Christian gods and really made them her own. And they were gods that I'd never heard of before I read these books, but they were based on some original actual belief systems. And what she does with it is really, she manages to walk that line between this is really romantic kind of god of death, but also really brutal, and you can understand this is actually also a god of death. And the god itself, he doesn't show up until the end, but all of the main characters worship him and do his bidding as assassins. So good. I really like that one.
That's actually something, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, is when people automatically default to the death god just being nothing but scary and evil. And I love the sound. I haven't read that one, but it sounds awesome. A good amount of ancient polytheistic societies actually loved their death gods. The Egyptians, most of them, that was their favorite guy. It was Anubis and things like, and I forget the other one's name. Yes, because that's who's going to take care of you and your loved ones when you die for the rest of eternity, and that's who's going to punish the guy who was mean to you for eternity. They loved their death gods, a good amount of them, and were there ones where the death god was scary and evil? Sure, but that doesn't have to be the default.
No, that's a very good point. And my next question is going to be, I would like to hear about deities or religious systems or folk systems that you guys have created in your worlds. I'm assuming that's why we're all here, because we've done that. But your question touches on one that I'll talk about in my own sort of mythos. For the world of the black-tongued thief, there is a death cult, death goddess, and her name is Talgata, and she is terrifying in aspect to those who have not been initiated. But one of the things about her, one of her great gifts, is she releases you from fear of death, and so warriors often come to her. They believe that they're going to meet her on a beach in the afterlife, and she will be their bride, or they will be hers. And that was all I really had when I wrote The Black-Tongued Thief. But when I wrote The Daughter's War, and I was taking the perspective of Galva, the young soldier who is going to get indoctrinated into this religion, I really challenged myself to go further with it and do a deeper dive and see what is it about this religion that would appeal to real people in the real world, you know. And I took a little bit of inspiration from the Latin religion of Santa Muerte, but what I figured out was one of the totems of the goddess of death in this, of Talgata, is an hourglass laying on its side. And there's one grain of sand in the hourglass. And what they teach is that when she comes to you, you are no longer constrained by time. Time is a vehicle that only moves in one direction, and after you're dead, you're dead. But if your last thought, if your last ideation is of her or of something that you would want to spend eternity in, that's what you spend eternity in that last thought, because time effectively stops for you. And that was really fun stuff to play with. But yeah, she's terrifying in aspect to those who fear death, but the gift she gives also is that if you become one of her favored ones, you can appear as her to your enemies. And her slogan is "Short life, bloody hand."
Yeah, that sounds great. Most recently, I have been more developing more folkloric mythologies and staying away from real deities in a lot of my work, partly because I wrote a trilogy that was a contemporary Norse gods. It was called the United States of Asgard. And when I was done with that, I was like, I gotta stay away from gods for a while, because it was really difficult having gods.
Ever had creating a mythology is actually for a book I haven't published yet. It's still in progress, but basically there are two predominant belief systems that are connected. The larger one that's been around for a long time is a form of ancestor worship, this belief that the human becomes the divine, but they specifically focus on the ones who have sort of been canonized. They call them the paragons, that these are the ones we're supposed to base our lives off of and live up to. There'll be local ones, and there's regional ones, but meanwhile, in more recent times, a new belief system has spun off of that wants a more personal, more intimate beliefs. And so they say we want to focus more on our individual ancestors, the people we knew, our own loved ones who have departed. And I was able to get a lot of world building from that, from how this conflict of we have the same core belief system, we came from the same background, but we're now offshooting. Took a lot of inspiration from the Protestant Reformation during the Renaissance, which was really interesting because the core belief has more of a Eastern influence, and so it was really fun combining those two. Even if they're just the local folklore, you're going to keep it really limited. If they live in a desert, they're going to be involved, they're going to be what someone in the desert cares about, and pretty much nothing else. You look at the Egyptian pantheon, and there weren't a whole lot of forest gods or anything like that. They didn't care that much about trees. There was Nile and Hippo, all that. And so with them being real, that makes them a little more broad. They're not going to be solely interested in what the locals care about. So you get to think about what makes the world work, and pretty much anything that is crucial to the entire planet, there's probably going to be a deity that is in some way focused on that, or it's one of their many focuses in some cases. Scary death god. So I'm going to go to my second least favorite, which I probably think about just as often. I can't stand it when someone says this is a polytheistic world. There's a whole pantheon of gods, but other than that, it looks exactly like medieval real world Europe. All right, medieval Europe was shaped so much by the Catholic Church. If the Catholic Church suddenly had a pantheon of deities, Europe would have looked so different. The architecture, the art, nothing would have been the same. And so it drives me crazy when it looks exactly like the real world medieval times, but we're supposed to believe that they're also all worshiping a pantheon. And that's actually something I think George R.R. Martin did really well, because he kind of combined the two. He said, they don't have a pantheon, it's just instead of believing in a trinity, they believe there's 7 faces of the one God.